I'm here with my friend and teammate, a fellow Too Many Cooks member, Luke, to talk about some of the new decks that will be played in MH3 and some of the brews that we've come up with before it officially comes out later today. Do you want to introduce yourself, Luke?
Hello, I'm Luke. Um, I don't really know what there is to say. Nix and I have been cooking some spice, as you can see here. We've got our take on a lizard twin that we're going to go over, as well as a more sensible deck maybe in Grixis Affinity, and then later on some absolute spice, a blue dredge list.
Yeah, there's a combination of like insane, like genius type stuff that might be terrible, and some actual serious, like something I would consider registering for like Pauper style lists. So I'm happy to kind of talk about them here. So the first list we've got has got quite a few new cards in it. It is a Lizard Twin, as we're calling it. It's the Broodscale combo that a lot of the Pauper fan base has been going a little bit crazy about. If you're not quite sure how the deck works, you're playing Basking Broodscale, which is a 2/2 Eldrazi Lizard. And whenever it gets a +1/+1 counter, it makes an Eldrazi spawn, which can be sacrificed for mana, just a 0/1. But you pair that with this card here, Sadistic Glee, which says whenever a creature dies, you can put a +1/+1 counter onto the enchanted creature. So what you end up doing is putting the Glee onto the Brood Scale, and then whenever the first creature afterwards dies, you'll be able to start sacking the spawns over and over again to grow the Brood Scale infinitely. You get infinite Eldrazi spawns, which also makes infinite colorless mana. And then this deck is looking to combo out and exile your entire opponent's library, I think, right, Luke?
Yeah, so the deck's it's a very linear combo deck where the output of the combo is infinite colorless mana and an infinitely large Basking Brood Scale. And we're just working with the most efficiently to win the game after that. So we came up with Thoughtpicker Witch, which if you just highlight there, when you have infinite Eldrazi that you can sack to it and infinite colorless mana, you can exile your opponent's entire library, and then they just deck on their next draw step. So that's the win condition we've come up with. But everything in the deck is just supporting that plan, trying to find the combo while protected, and then deck your opponent or win with an infinitely large brood scale attacking.
Yeah, like we've kind of separated the cards here into different sections, kind of depending on what they do in the deck. So you have the main combo cards here, the Brood Scale and the Glee. But the deck is really heavily built around these draw spells as well. So we've got 4 Deadly Disputes, a classic Pauper staple. I'm pretty sure anyone watching this knows what Deadly Dispute does by now. But if you don't, you can sack an artifact or creature, draw 2 and make a treasure, which is really strong just for being kind of a 1 mana draw 2 is good, and we have a large amount of stuff to sack, so that's never really an issue. But the rest of the draw spells are new. We've got this new card, Malevolent Rumble. This is 1 and a green. Sorcery speed, but still good. You reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a permanent from any of those cards into your hand, put the rest into the graveyard, which will be relevant. We'll talk about that later. And you get to also make an Eldrazi spawn. Why are we playing this, do you think, Luke, over, say, additional copies of, like, Reckoner's Bargain or something?
So Malevolent Rumble is a crazy addition for this deck, and when it was revealed like a bit after Brood Scale was, we knew that it was going to be a 4 of in this deck pretty much immediately, just because the colorless token, the Eldrazi spawn that it creates, refunds part of the mana cost, but it can also be used to start the combo by sacking it. So, or it can be sacrificed to a Deadly Dispute style effect to draw more cards. The Malevolent Rumble, because it gets a permanent, it can get a land if we need a land, it can get a spell. All of the combo pieces are permanents. The only cards that it cannot get in the entire main deck are Deadly Disputes, Eviscerator's Insights, and Snakeskin Veils. Everything else in the deck is a permanent. So it's kind of like an impulse with double upside in that it puts the cards in the graveyard, which was useful for cards like Eviscerator's Insight, and when we have Evolution Witness in the deck. But and then it also refunds part of the mana cost and creates a body.
Yeah, it's got that similar sort of effect to Deadly Dispute where you're drawing a card. It's more of like a card selection spell than a card draw spell, but you're drawing and then also getting that little bit of like thing left over, like a treasure or the Scion in this case. And the fact that Sadistic Glee is also a permanent is great. It just means you can grab either of the combo pieces there. And Yeah, so we'll talk about Eviscerator's Insight before getting onto Witness, but it pairs really great with Witness as well. So Eviscerator's Insight is another new card that this deck uses. It's very similar to Deadly Dispute. It's got the same sort of wording, except it doesn't make a treasure, but it has the key extra bonus of having flashback for 4 and a black, which is quite a lot of mana, but you know, in the slower grindy games, you can definitely get there, and just having that added upside of being a flashback cost. When you have like, you know, treasures from Deadly Dispute and maybe Scions lurking around that you've made across the, you know, couple turns, getting to 5 mana is not a terribly impossible thing to do. Do you think this insight could be like a flex slot and maybe changes, or do you think the flashback is just good enough that it is definitely kind of like a mainstay?
Yeah, well, the important thing about Eviscerator's Insight is that it's actually one of the best ways we have of finding the way to actually win the game once we've established infinite colorless mana. Because if we have infinite colorless mana and this is in our graveyard, then it's 1 black, draw 2 cards, because you can sacrifice the Eldrazi spawn and it just comes right back if you're comboing off. So the important thing about Eviscerator's Insight is that, especially paired with something like Snarling Gorehound, we can set up the top card of our deck and then use an Eviscerator's Insight from our graveyard to draw it, so we can set our win condition to the top and then just pick it up in our combo turn.
Yeah, that moves us quite nicely onto the Gorehound, I feel like. If we should talk about that next, because this is a card that actually our team in general has been talking about for a little while, about how it was close to being really strong or could be good. It has quite a unique effect. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with Menace. But whenever any creature with power 2 or less enters, you get to surveil a card. So that's kind of like Scry. You get to look at the top and put it into the graveyard or leave it on top. But as Luke was mentioning, when you're comboing off, you can start to basically filter the top card of your library. Since you technically will be able to get infinite surveils, you can stack the top of your deck to the perfect card. Do you think it's worth having the 4 good here? Would like it doesn't work too amazingly with all the other creatures? Well, it does actually, right? Every creature in the deck triggers it, I think, right?
Yeah, so I really like Snarling Gorehound. It's our main, it along with Malevolent Rumble, are our main card selection tools. As you mentioned, every creature in the deck, plus all of the Eldrazi spawn tokens, are power 2 or less. So it's going to trigger every single time we have a creature enter the battlefield. And if you can combo with the Gorehound on the field, you just win the game instantly. There's pretty much nothing that the opponent can do, because you can pretty much turn your entire library into the graveyard and then win with a combination of Eviscerator's, like either Eviscerator's Insight, drawing the 1 card left in your library and you know what it is, or you can use like a Slitherhead Evolution Witness to get back a Thoughtpicker Witch and cast it. And like, if you're comboing with Snarling Gorehound on the field, like, it's kind of a 3-card combo that you need Broodscale, Sadistic Glee, and Gorehound, but you win the game like 100% of the time.
Yeah, the Gorehound to me was the most surprising, like sneakily good card in the deck. It can weirdly chip in for a decent bit of damage against quite a lot of decks too, and you know, you play enough like creature stuff, like even Malevolent Rumble can trigger the Gorehound, the Khalni Gardens and the mana base can trigger the Gorehound and be sack fodder as well. Like, you have a surprising amount of ways to keep this just being a steady like card selection tool, whilst also being, you know, evasive and able to, you know, help with the combo as well. We've spoken a lot about Evolution Witness, so I feel like we should probably talk about that one next. Do you want to kind of introduce this card a little bit?
Yeah, so Evolution Witness is the only 3 mana card in the deck, and we really like it because, as I said before when I was talking about Malevolent Rumble, nearly every card is a permanent, and being able to recur permanents, it means that we can get back a Basking Broodscale, we can get back a Sadistic Glee, we can get back a Gorehound, we can get back a Thoughtpicker Witch. It kind of acts like a bit like the Goblin Matron of the deck, in a deck like Mogwarts, where it can, as long as we have stuff in the graveyard that we want to get back, we can get it back. It also, what we found is it creates another creature that can kind of win the game on its own, so it forces opponents' removal out. Otherwise, they could pretty much just hold all of their removal for Basking Broodscale. But an Evolution Witness, and the ability to put some counters on it, just is scary enough that they probably have to remove it.
Yeah, there's some like really cool lines too where like this deck, when we've been testing it, for me at least, has been really interesting because it looks like a really simple A plus B combo, and like on the face of it, kind of like Splinter Twin. That's where the joke of Lizard Twin comes from. But you have so many of these like really strange, unique lines where you can kind of muscle through a lot of things or kind of produce wins out of nowhere. Like if you have a Broodscale and a Glee, for example, already set up, you can actually then Glee onto like an Evolution Witness afterwards, which means you can start pretty much looping every single permanent from your graveyard back into hand. If you mill your entire deck with the Gorehound and Broodscale, you can use the Slitherhead in the graveyard to put a counter on Witness and get something back that can then win you the game. There's just so many like weird, interesting lines that you can take. And talking of like weird, interesting lines, we're playing Energy Refractor, and we'll talk a bit more about the rocks of this deck. But once you can make infinite colorless mana, these being able to filter mana is perfect for these new landscapes that we've been trying out, which have cycling for 3 of a color. But this basically turns, when you have the infinite colorless, the Energy Refractor lets you use these as just redraws, which can be good for breaking through a combo, or if you just need to pull the top card of your deck into your hand. Like, there's so many weird lines, but I mean, this split of rocks might look a little weird. We've got a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. That's a little strange. You want to talk about why it's like this and how we've kind of been discussing what the best orientation of like these rocks might be?
Yeah, so Energy Refractor you talked about, it lets us filter our mana, which is obviously very, very good in a deck that can produce infinite colorless mana but can't make colored mana on the combo turn. Ichor Wellspring is purely there for card advantage. It's the only rock that actually goes card positive because it draws when it enters and when it leaves via something like Deadly Dispute or Eviscerator's Insight. We'd probably love to have 4, but we couldn't just quite squeeze it in. Maybe there is a universe where 3 Energy Refractor, 4 Ichor Wellspring is a better slightly. Implement of Ferocity is a very interesting one in that it creates a loop with Evolution Witness. So if you implement a Ferocity onto an Evolution Witness, the Implement of Ferocity will be in the graveyard by the time the Evolution Witness trigger happens. So you can get the Implement of Ferocity back. So you can spend 1 and a green to draw a card effectively. So it's draw a card and put +1 on Evolution Witness. But it also helps, you can just use it to put a counter on a Broodscale to start your loop going. You can use it to put a counter on a Snarling Gorehound if you're trying to attack in just for like menace damage to force a slower deck to attack. And you can of course also just sack it to Deadly Dispute. The Chromatic Star is just another way to filter colors. If all of the Energy Refractors are at the bottom of your deck, you can use this on a combo turn to make 1 colored mana, which can just help certain lines win the game. But we thought that the Energy Refractor is just slightly better at doing the job.
Yeah, we've gone back and forth a lot on these 2 cards, right? Before it was like a mix of stars and no refractor. We've tried refractor and no stars. We've tried a lot of these like kind of configurations, and it's quite hard to tell without more extensive playtesting, I think, which is like better. There's like lines where you need a star to win because of the draw, and it helps set that up. There's also lines where you can't win without where you can win with Energy Refractor, but you can't win with star.
Yeah, in the version where we're playing more Chromatic Stars and we weren't playing Energy Refractor, we were also playing more Slitherheads because it helped to make colored mana. You could like Slitherhead and Evolution Witness, get back the star, make a mana, Slitherhead back the star, make mana really slowly. But the Energy Refractor kind of just does it for you without needing to put more bad cards in your deck.
Yeah, we found it let you kind of trim the chaff almost in a sense, because the flaw of a Slitherhead of just having to pay a colored mana for a 1/1 that doesn't do anything is probably not as good as just paying 2 mana to redraw.
The Slitherhead is something that we've kept 1 of in the deck. Maybe more as just like an homage to it can do some cool things. It might not be necessary at all and might just be worth cutting, but it's one of the cards where you'd love to mill it off a Malevolent Rumble, but you never want to see it, like, you never want to top deck it.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice as a combo enabler. It does a lot of the stuff that you might need it to do in like your combo turns, but you never want to actually card cast it really ever. It's kind of awkward to do that.
Yeah, and then the last card in the main deck that we haven't really talked about, the last spell, I guess, is Snakeskin Veil. It's pretty obvious from reading why we'd want this. It blanks a removal spell while putting a +1/+1 counter on the creature, and the 2 creatures in the deck that they're likely to remove, Basking Broodscale and Evolution Witness, both have a trigger when they get a 1/1 counter put on them, so it blanks their removal and gets you value. Crazy strong card. We'd run probably 6 or 7 of this card if we were allowed to.
Yeah, if they print another 1 mana like plus and plus and counter hexproof card, I feel like you would definitely be running more of them for sure. It's so good at protecting your combo and just fighting through nonsense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if you have an Evolution Witness on the field and your opponent tries to Lightning Bolt it and you Snakeskin Veil in response, it's usually just enough value to take over on the spot, because you not only do they lose their removal spell, you get your best permanent back from the graveyard.
Yeah, it's very silly. When it looks good, it looks really good. And it's never really a bad card to have. Like, you can use it for value by just using it on a witness to pick something up if you have to. You don't want to be using it like that, but it always has applications, even if it's not like being used as protect the combo, for example, which is nice. Like, everything in the deck kind of is like a combo piece, but also can support a sort of fine mid-range plan. Like, you're probably not going to win many games by beating them down, but the pressure of them having to respect it is really important, we found in quite a few matches.
And just having a bunch of draw twos like Deadly Disputes at Ichor Wellsprings is going to mean that you will be able to threaten to combo multiple times in a game. You're probably not going to win the first time you put a Sadistic Glee on the stack, because your opponent's probably going to be able to interact. But it's more like asking the question, the second and third time that I put Sadistic Glee on the stack, can you also deal with that?
Yeah, and you have a lot of ways to recur the Glees and things, which is why it's great. And we should probably talk about the mana base a little bit, because this is the part of the deck I'm not the most sure about right now, but I think it's an interesting take on how to kind of like use the mana base. These landscapes are really quite strong. The deck thinning of fetch lands in 60 card formats is something that's always talked about a lot and isn't actually that great a lot of the time, but it is like a marginal increase to deck efficiency sometimes, which is something to consider. But if you look at this deck, it really only needs 1 green, 1 black, and then the rest of the lands can very easily just sit as colored sources. You have a lot of colorless spells, a lot of cards with one and another color in them, and we found that like having these untapped sources to be able to like, you can fetch on turn 1, get what you need to play on turn 1, on turn 2, and then you can easily start setting up to just be good for the rest of the game. And also Energy Refractor does help these be a little bit better in the late game. If you like don't have time to crack one, you can still always kind of use it like a tap land, as if you were like a, you know, paying 2 mana for 1 mana. It ends up being like a tap land in that sense.
The deck's mana requirements are really interesting, because when you're when you're comboing, the green mana is really important for the Broodscale and for Snakeskin Veils and stuff to protect it. But then once you've comboed, you're very pinched on black mana, and you'll need black mana to cast a Gorehound or a Thoughtpicker Witch or something, flashback and Eviscerator's Insight to actually win the game. So you do end up needing like a fairly even mix of green and black. Which is it's one of the most tricky things is figuring out what you need to like fetch and how you need to actually set up the turn before the combo turn to make sure that you don't just run out of mana, because it can be quite mana intensive if you have to cast Broodscale, Sadistic Glee, and Snakeskin Veil, and then after you make Infinite Colorless win by casting a Gorehound and then a Thoughtpicker Witch. That's like 9 mana or something.
There's also some considerations where like you do have cards you want in your deck that you don't want to surveil with Gorehound. So sometimes like you'll see like you have your Thoughtpicker Witch on top, you can always fetch it away so that it's still in the deck, but you don't have to draw it next turn, is another thing that can be quite useful sometimes. And like you can also pick them up with Witness if you really need to just keep hitting land drops, or you want to be able to cycle them away. It's not something that will come up very often, but it is something you can do. And then beyond that, the one land that I really don't like, but is kind of in there, because I think, again, the mana base is a bit unsure right now, is the one of Artifact land, just because it can be sacrificed to Dispute and Insight. Still not sure about it. Not sure how I feel about it. I think it might be better as a Khalni Garden, but I'm not too sure. We have 2 Khalni Gardens, which make plant tokens when they come down. They're just a tapped green source. And then some forests and swamps, because you can't grab dual lands off of these landscapes. But the deck is realistically only playing 3 tap lands, if you consider these as coming in as untapped colorless sources most of the time and being fine like that, which they usually are, which is great because it means you can, you know, you can curve out and play your combo without having to stress too much about it. Once you get 1 black, 1 green, you can start to do stuff. And normally you're going to want more than that, but it gives you the ability to be a little bit fast if you need to without having to play loads of tap lands, which is cool.
Yeah, so when we're testing a set before it's released on Magic Online and there's no data, it's very, very hard to come up with actual good sideboards. So take all of this sideboarding stuff with even more of a pinch of salt as the main deck, because this is just some ideas of what we think would be good in different matchups, but it's very unrefined.
This is true for all of these decks too, right? We can't really sideboard against a metagame that we aren't fully sure the numbers of and how it's going to be there. Like, we know what Broodscale is weak to sometimes, and we know how, like, what you might want to beat them, but we don't know how popular and common they're going to be. So you want to talk about what we've got here?
Yeah, so Tamiyo safe is very, very easy, the sideboard. Tamiyo Safekeeping is another protection spell, and it's for removal pile decks. So think something like Golgari Gardens, where the only way for them to interrupt your combo is to point a removal spell at the Basking Broodscale. This would take us to 8 protection spells in the main deck, which probably means that when we're comboing, we can keep up 2, like ideally we're keeping up 2 layers of protection. Spellbomb is for decks that are doing unfair things with the graveyard. And I'm going to stress unfair things here because we're a combo deck, so we don't want to be diluting our game plan and bringing in interaction. That's just not really what we want to do. But if there's a deck that's doing things faster and more unfair than us, we do need to interact with it, and that's what the Spellbomb is for. Stuff like Goblin combo Mogwarts, Nihil Spellbomb does break their combo, and also like the other combo decks like Ultratron use their graveyard as well. So that's what the Spellbomb is going to be for.
The upside of Spellbomb being that you can loop it with Witness to repeatedly essentially just remove someone's graveyard from ever being an issue. But the lowest downside of it is, like, if you say you're at the 3/1 drops to play this, at the very minimum, it can just be a rock that replaces itself and is still good with Deadly Dispute. It's not ever terrible to bring in. But like Luke is saying, you really don't want to slow yourself down for no reason. It has to be for a good reason.
Mesmeric Fiend is our answer to counterspell based decks, because we're pretty good against removal because we have Snakeskin Veil and Tamiyo Safekeeping, but counterspell stopping us from even resolving a Sadistic Glee or a Basking Broodscale. There's not really anything we can do to fight that. So Mesmeric Fiend can just force the counterspell out from their hand, or it would just take it by force. And you can also do the neat trick where you Mesmeric Fiend, and then with its ETB trigger on the stack, you can Deadly Dispute it, or Eviscerator's Insight, or sack it to Thoughtpicker Witch, and then they will never get the card back. It would just be exiled permanently. So that's a cool line. We started out with a few of these in the main deck, but they're very matchup dependent. You don't really want to see Mesmeric Fiend against any aggro deck, really.
Yeah, you want 4 of these or you don't want any of them in the main deck is kind of what we came down to. And, like, you would play this over Duress again because you're playing Malevolent Rumble. You have Witness. You can loop these things if you're sacking them over and over again. You can pick them up with the Rumble. So, and they actually also trigger Gorehound. Like, it has more synergy than just playing a Duress does. But you have to keep in mind, if your opponent is on something like Blue-Red Scred, for example, they can remove the Fiend and get the card back. So you have to be thinking about that as well. It's not like going to permanently remove their card in the same way Duress might in some matchups.
Yeah, and then the last card, Moment's Peace. This is to not get run over by mono red aggro. You can prevent combat damage that will be dealt this turn, and you can do that twice. So the idea is, if they're trying to kill you with a Kuldotha Rebirth plus a Goblin Bushwhacker, you're going to cast Moment's Peace, and it's going to buy you an extra turn. And then next turn, you're going to flash it back, and it's going to buy you another extra turn. And then hopefully with those extra turns, you can assemble enough board presence to combo and win.
Yep, and even if you mill it on, like, Rumble, for example, because this isn't a permanent, it's okay. It has flashback. You're still going to get some use out of it. I'm not fully sure if these are the best. Like, we're not really a good Weather the Storm deck is the problem, so unless you've got comboed off and then it's infinite life, but yeah,
the thing is, our combo doesn't actually generate infinite storm count because we're taking game actions and not casting cards. So even when we combo Earth, we're not actually generating that like a high storm count.
You're right, that's my bad.
One idea that we did have was Essence Warden. So Essence Warden is the green Soul Sister, and that would make our when we combo we'd gain infinite life, which would be good enough against mono red. But the problem is a 1-mana 1/1 isn't really that's only really useful when you're comboing. Just isn't particularly where we want to be against mono red. But I would test this card maybe.
I think it's worth testing. The worry that I have is that a 1-mana 1/1 creature, specifically against mono red, that requires them to have to play into it to be good, is usually kind of easy for them to answer.
Yeah, it's like if you cast this out of 1, they're just going to cast the card Lightning Bolt and then trade 1-for-1 with it, and then play out some creatures and beat you down.
And you can't really afford to be trading 1-for-1 if you can in this deck. You need to be trying to like recoup as much and keep as much card advantage as possible, right? Because you are trying to win with a combo and go over the top of people. So something to consider. But that's sort of our initial Broodscale combo list. Where do you think this will fall in like the terms of like the tiers of the metagame? Just as a kind of like a gut feeling.
So I think my gut is that this deck is going to be between a 1% and a 2% meta share, like once it's settled. I think early days there'll be more people playing it purely because it's a new deck and it's fairly novel, but I don't see it taking like a top spot at all. I think that it's got some things going for it over the other combo decks, but the other combo decks also like they've got advantages as well. So the deck lacks any real tutors for the combo pieces like Mogwarts. So I think Mogwarts will just be a better deck because Goblin Matron kind of ties the whole thing together a bit better than Evolution Witness does in Lizard Twin. So I think it's going to be like a tier 2/tier 3 deck. It will be able to steal wins, but if you're looking to win like a big tournament, I wouldn't ever think of registering this deck, to be honest.
I think what we can kind of comfortably say though is the deck is got a really solid, like the combo is solid. Once you kind of get it going, it's good. So it's like
the deck has legs. It is not a joke tier deck.
Yeah.
But it is not a top tier deck either, and that is fine. Not everything has to be a top tier deck. It can just be fine and fun, and that's what this deck is to me.
It's very fun to play. It's a very fine combo deck, and the other thing is it's very likely to get new pieces printed. Plus and counters are pretty like evergreen. There's a good chance you might get another Snakeskin Veil type card for like a limited environment. You could maybe get more draw. We've seen endless Deadly Dispute like cards being printed. If one ever makes like they ever print one that makes like a small guy or like a dude, like an actual creature, that could be really good for the deck, for example. Like, there's so many things they could print that could make this deck better. So that's something really interesting to kind of keep in mind. And just when new cards get printed, maybe have a look, see does it go into this deck, maybe improve it. We'll have to see. But I think I agree. I think it will be like in the bottom section of tier 2 to begin with. Maybe people will innovate and find some more sneaky tech, and it'll shoot up. But I like the deck. It's fun. We should maybe move on to the next one. The next one will be a little easier to go through because this is a good old faithful deck. This one is, I mean, you don't need to, you know Grixis Affinity if you've played Pauper for at least a little bit.
Yeah, so coming into Modern Horizons 3, Grixis Affinity, one of the tier 1 decks in the format, and we've kind of just noticed that what we think are the best 2 cards in the set are going in as 4-offs. So it's just Grixis Affinity with 4 copies of Refurbished Familiar and 4 copies of Sneaky Snacker.
These cards are so good. They just go into everything. It's crazy.
Next, yeah, do you want to talk about why we think that these cards are really strong?
Yeah, now I did a review of the cards of Pauper, and I think maybe I might have even missed the mark on just how good I think the Stacker and the Familiar are. I was high on them already. The Refurbished Familiar, first of all, Affinity for Artifacts is a great word you want to see in any Affinity deck, but just any deck in general. We have 20 Artifact lands, all our lands are Artifact lands. This is so insanely consistently a 1-mana card, right? So you have to evaluate this card as a 1-mana card. It is 1 black for a 2/1 flyer that will always force your opponent to discard a card, and if they don't have any cards to discard, you get to draw a card. So on its baseline, this is a 1-mana evasive creature that doesn't die to Snuff Out, it doesn't die to like any of the free black removal spells. It flies to block annoying things that you know in the format are pretty present, like fairies and things, and it will always be a 2-for-1. You are always going to get 2 cards worth of value out of this thing. It's going to either make your opponent discard, make you draw, or it's going to trade with a removal spell or a creature somehow, probably. There's only one way to answer this card cleanly 1-for-1, and that is to counterspell it. And even then, counterspelling this thing feels terrible. So this card is incredibly good. I think it's going to be very meta-defining. Wouldn't push it as far to say it's bannable. Maybe we'll have to see how it shakes out, but this card is really good. And the other card is a weirdly good answer to the familiar in Sneaky Snacker.
Hilariously, if your opponent on turn 2 plays a refurbished familiar and forces you to discard a card, what card other than Sneaky Snacker would you be more happy to discard? Sneaky Snacker, you can discard it from your opponent's familiars, you can discard it to demand answers, you can discard it to the blood tokens from Blood Fountain, and then once it's in the graveyard, our deck is running 10 draw 2s, you can see there, 10 draw 2s spells, and any of these cast on your turn is going to return it as a 2-1 flyer. 2-1 flyer, as we've mentioned, it's a really annoying, evasive stat line. It's going to just chip in for damage. It's going to chump block. It's going to trade with Glint Hawks. It's going to just be a recursive menace.
It's gross, yeah. This Snacker, if it trades with anything, right? It trades with any creature, you're probably going to be up on cards because it's going to come back at some point and it's going to trade with something else or it's going to keep hitting them. It's just so good.
It can get in the way of Mirror Enforcers. It can get in the way of any big creature that's threatening your life total. And then it can come right back and do it all over again. The rest of this list is just kind of standard affinity stuff. We've changed a few cards to help benefit the plan. So, for example, Demand Answers is taking the spot that typically, what's the life
Reckoner's
game one?
Bargain.
Reckoner's Bargain usually occupies. This is because Demand Answers, if you cast it in your main phase and as the additional cost, discard a Sneaky Snacker, the draw 2 will happen afterwards. That will trigger the Sneaky Snacker and it will put it into play.
So many crazy lines. It's so good.
A line that I had at our LGS on Sunday was my opponent on turn 2 played a refurbished familiar. I discarded a Sneaky Snacker, and then on turn 3 I played my own familiar, demanded answers, a second Sneaky Snacker, and got 2 Sneaky Snackers back, putting 3 2-1 flyers into play on turn 3 while maintaining card neutrality, which is it's completely obnoxious.
It's very silly, and like the Snacker is sneakily so good with Deadly Dispute too. Like hit my opponent for 2 in the air, or like say I've got 2 and they have 1 blocker. The one they block, I can sacrifice it, assuming I haven't already drawn loads of cards this turn. I can sack it to Deadly Dispute. It goes into the graveyard before you draw, and then boom, you draw your 3rd card for turn. It just comes straight back, but you're up 2 cards and you made a treasure. This card is disgusting. It is so obnoxious. Hard casting it feels a little awkward and probably not the best. It's not where you want to be, but in Affinity, where a lot of your cards are kind of free anyway, it's not even really a big deal. Like, you were going to play 4 Thoughtcast and 4 Deadly Dispute anyway, right? That's 8 draw 2s that just trigger this to come back because your draw step counts. Demand Answers is kind of great with the other stuff anyway. And like, with Candy Trail, Ichor Wellspring, Blood Tokens, you have ways to just draw 2 cards that aren't even these anyway as well to get it on like your own turn. Like it is, I think it's going to be crazy obnoxious. There's some maybe a little bit of weirdness. There's this 1 Spellbomb in the main deck here. Do you want to talk about why that is there?
We've got nine rocks, I guess, in our deck, and these slots are kind of very up in the air as to what's going to shake out being the best. In this list, we've decided to go for one-off Spellbomb purely because we think there's going to be a lot of graveyard recursion hanging around in the format. Apart from mono red, pretty much every other deck that's popular is using the graveyard for something. So a main deck Spellbomb seems like a good idea. We've got Candy Trails because we've cut the Reckoner's Bargain, so we do need to find life gain somewhere. And one thing I'm worried about with this list is it might not have enough life gain for the online meta if there's going to be a lot of mono red present. So that might be something to think about before just copying this list and taking it into a league if there's going to be a lot of mono red about.
You might want some Lembus, you might want some Reckoner's Bargains over the demand. The demand isn't necessary, it just feels really good, but
Yeah, this is a greedy list, I think.
for sure.
Then the Blood Fountain is, well, it's just gonna rebuy all of your cheap. It's gonna rebuy Mirror Enforcers, Refurbished Familiars. It makes 2 artifacts for your affinity count, helping you play Mirror Enforcers out. The Blood Token allows you to discard a Sneaky Snacker from your hand. The card is great. We'd probably want to play more, but we need to have a certain mass of cards that actually do things, like early game. So we can't really just shove in 4. But maybe in a slow enough meta you could. And Ichor Wellspring is just another draw 2 in our deck. It takes our deck up to, what, 14 draw 2s, if you count everything in the column to the right.
Yep.
Then the column to the left is the interaction column. Again, these slots are kind of up in the air. We've gone for a 2-2 split of Galvanic Blast and Cast Down. Most of the stuff can be dealt with by Galvanic Blast, but you don't want to get run over by like an Exhumed Troll of Khazad Doom on turn 2, so you do need to run some number of Cast Down, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Then Counterspell, we're running the maximum number of blue lands, so Counterspell should be pretty easy to hold up. There are other options like Metallic Rebuke could be played in this slot. Negate could be played. We've got some negates in the sideboard. But I think if you're running a deck that can support it, Counterspell is too good to not have. And then Makeshift Munitions it's a finishing card that gives you inevitability because you can eventually just sack all of your lands for a ping a piece and just ping someone out. But it also is another card that works incredibly well with the card Sneaky Snacker, because you can sack Sneaky Snacker to ping something and then return Sneaky Snacker to the battlefield.
It's very good. I actually think of all of these cards here, you can maybe adjust the numbers of these, but I think you always want at least 1 munitions in your affinity deck.
Yeah, I would never cart Makeshift Munitions, to be honest. And then the one-off Krat Clan Shaman is just this card's really good against mono red.
It's good against a lot of the weird stuff, right? Like walls too.
Yeah, it's great. It's great against walls combo. It's great against anything that's like go wide aggro. Maybe you want a second one and you can trim something. 19 lands is a bit dubious, but could be workable.
Some people have been trying it, but I feel like 20 feels good still. It's hard to say. Just note that this doesn't kill flyers, so if it is a super sneaky stacker refurbished familiar metagame, it might be less good if like mono red is dead. But maybe it becomes a sideboard card, so it's something to keep out. Keep in mind.
This is why for now we've got breath weapons in the sideboard. It might genuinely better to be playing a breath weapon in the main and then the Krat clans in the sideboard. But again, this is something that, because the cards aren't actually out yet, we don't know. If you're watching this when the cards are out, just go to MTG decks and look at what people are doing right now, because they'll probably have a better idea.
Yeah, the thing with breath weapon 2 is you actually are playing a lot of creatures that die to it yourself now. Now, the Snackers dying isn't too bad. You can bring those back, but, you know, it is a consideration you have to make. But, like, the deck just feels so good. We had a line in testing where both of us were empty-handed. I cracked the Blood Fountain, picked up 2 familiars, played them both. That drew me 2 cards, which triggered the Snackers to come back, and 3 of them came back, which put 10 power into play from no cards in hand, and drew 2 cards. It's for like, what was it, 6 mana? That is just ridiculous. There's so many lines of like, the familiar in the early game is great disruption. In the mid game, when your opponent's low on cards, because you're affinity, right? You're growing them out of cards. It just comes down and seals the game by making them discard their only relevant cards left. Late game, it's just a cantripping evasive creature. It's just so good. This deck looks really strong. We should probably talk about the sideboard, but the sideboard's pretty cut and dry. It feels fairly stock, right?
Again, sideboard disclaimer in full effect. We don't know how the meta is going to be. This is an example sideboard that we think is a reasonable sideboard going into a blind meta. We've got 4 Hydroblast and 4 Pyroblast because we are a Grixis deck. We can play both, therefore we will play both. We've got 2 Gorilla Shamans for the Affinity Mirror. If there is loads of Affinity, I would consider bringing a third, because this card is really nasty. If you play this and your opponent has got a hand that has like 2 untapped sources and 1 bridge, they're just going to have a miserable play experience. Then we've got another Spellbomb for graveyard-focused decks. Again, in the right meta, I could see running maybe 2 Spellbombs in the main deck and maybe a third in the sideboard.
Yep, they're really good against Stacker because Stacker's a trigger. You can't draw more cards to bring it back. So just keep that in mind. If your opponent's casting a Brainstorm, you let the Brainstorm resolve and the trigger go on the stack before you use your Spellbomb. You don't do it in response in case they have another way to draw cards. You want to wait for the Stacker trigger to be on the stack, and then it's gone for good if you have the Grave Hate.
Yep, then these negates are to deal with artifact removal that is in a color that's not red. So, for example, the card Dust to Dust, which, if you've played any amount of Grixis Affinity, you'll know this card is a bit of a menace. So we bring in negates to try and not get the card Dust to Dust played against us.
They could be turn asides if it's like clear that the only non-creature spell we care about is Dust to Dust. Depends how the meta shakes up. But yeah, just, you have to have these if you're playing Grixis.
And then, yeah, Breath Weapon is the best sideboard card against mono red. If you Breath Weapon and clear their board more than once in a game, they can usually not win. And it's also great against, other just go wide decks that you'll face. It's pretty good at dealing with Inspectors and Glinthawks. It can clear Elves boards.
Yeah, I mean, there's very little else to say. It's Grixis Affinity. It's the deck that you know and hate, probably, if you're an enfranchised player, or you know and love it and played a bunch. The deck is just solid. It will always be solid until they address the artifact lands. Like, just try it out. It seems like it's probably going to be the best deck, I think.
If there was a tournament tomorrow that had a prize of £1 million or dollars, I would just take this deck. I'm pretty much close to this 75 probably, without thinking too much about it. I just see this deck as being probably the strongest thing you can do until someone inevitably comes around and breaks something. This is what I perceive to be the strongest archetype for sure.
But you've heard about Affinity before. Affinity is lame. Let's move on to something that is clearly insane and meta-definingly broken. This is some absolute nonsense that I have been messing around with. I'm really happy with how this is kind of shaking out. It feels interesting. It's like a new axis of Dredge. A very strange, very non-linear deck in Pauper, and just any format that Dredge is legal in general. You'll notice there's a lot of blue cards in this list. That is not something that Dredge typically is messing around with. Why the hell are we playing blue cards? Well, that is simple. Brainstorm is to put it simply, is a broken magic card. This card would not be printed at common today, I don't think, if it was printed. Like, they probably just wouldn't print a card like this again today. Let's think about how we can make Brainstorm good, because if we're just playing it as like a draw 3, put 2 back, and we have to draw those cards, it's not great. Let's just kind of look at our deck here. We have 4 creatures that mill cards from the top of our library. Another 4 creatures that mill cards from the top of our library. But we're even playing Snackers, because Brainstorm just brings them back. We have cards that Dredge cards from the top of our library, so that's now, 12 cards that can clear the top of our library. We have 7 cyclers that fetch and clear our library too. So we have like 19 ways to make Brainstorm really disgusting and just be an insane card selection tool that sometimes brings back enough stackers to just play a Dread Return on a Lotleth Giant and shoot someone. I think there are a lot left giants in here, by the way. They're just hiding. There they are. Bring those in.
There we are.
You say, better not have missed those out. But yeah, this is pretty similar to like a stock Dredge list. You've got the same 14 lands, although we've added an extra Contaminated Aquifer as something you can search for here, and an island, because you are playing blue spells. Conduit Pylons is a card that's been seeing more play because it's a Surveil land that can filter mana, which is nice with Brainstorm. But yeah, our land cyclers can get any of these lands, which lets us easily play what's in our hand. By having like 8 creatures that find lands by milling as well, they're just really good for making our colors pretty safe. But the main reason you might want to play this over a regular Dredge deck is you kind of get a beatdown plan that is more effective. You get recursive 2/1 flyers. Brainstorm can bring them back. Deep Analysis can bring them back. The exact build of this is not fully set in place. Like, maybe you want more Deep Analysis in the main. I've tried some lists with Muldrifter. I've tried not playing these Spellsetter sprites, but I'll talk about those in a little bit. But you kind of get to have a beatdown plan and an unfair one-shot plan. all in one deck, and you also, you know, against aggro decks, if you mill an all to the bone and you're like turbo dredging, because you can replace brainstorm draws with dredges, by the way. That is something you can do. This can be a 1-mana mill 15 if you really want it to be. There's just so much silly stuff you can do that brainstorm enables and other draw spells enable, like deep analysis in this deck. You've seen it, right? What do you think your like initial thoughts on it are?
So this deck's really, it's going to play a lot like the old dredge lists in the meta, where if there's a downtick in graveyard hate, this deck is going to be very, very hard to disrupt, because the only angle you can really attack it is to attack its graveyard. It doesn't really care about counter spells, it doesn't really care about removal spells. The only thing it cares about is you not exiling its graveyard. So if it's going to be very meta dependent. If people are playing a lot of main deck graveyard hate, then it won't be good. If people are not playing main deck graveyard hate, then it will be very good. The old dredge deck, I guess, can we call it old at this point? The more green version was using the Jump Dredge, yeah, was using Acorn Harvest to get the creatures back for Dredge Return. In this list, we have Sneaky Snacker instead. If you flashback Deep Analysis, it has the same cost as Acorn Harvest, except you draw cards, and the drawing cards triggers Sneaky Snacker. So if you have 2 Sneaky Snackers in your graveyard and you flashback a Deep Analysis, it does the exact same thing as Acorn Harvest, except you're +2 cards, and the creatures you get back are 2/1 flyers instead of 1/1 squirrels. So it's just a lot stronger. But of course, you've got to have milled snackers to get into that position, and that's the concept pretty much.
Yeah, and the joy of this deck is that it's quite complicated to play in a lot of lines. Brainstorm is a notoriously hard card to play with in the first place, but I think it does more than people give it credit for in a dredge list. This idea was created by like me after I've seen a lot of blue dredge lists in Legacy played, and obviously they're leveraging Force of Will, and I wanted to play foil. That was my first idea: sneaky stack of foil brainstorm in like a dredge list. That sounds cool, but honestly, even here, like bringing back stackers of value to beat your opponent down while setting up your graveyard is good. Even just playing this to dredge a bunch of times and then continue to and then you put the imps back on top and then use another card to mill them off back into the graveyard to start dredging again next turn. Like, I found with dredge a lot when I played it, when I tested it, you got stuck with cards you just did not want to cast a lot of the time. Like, oh, I've got this Lotleth Giant in my hand. What do I do with it? Like, you could just got it to a Scrapworm and draw. But what if you could just put it back into your deck for free and mill it and also get new cards instead of just like blindly drawing? It gives you a lot of ways to like set things up. And the card I'm most skeptical of, I should say, is Spellstutter Sprite. This is a counterspell on a creature. So it's a creature for like Lotleth Giant purposes. It's a fairy, much like the stacker is. So, but even on its own, if they don't have a removal spell, this will just straight up counter pretty much any of the Grave Hate cards that are commonly played. You can counter like Nihil Spellbombs with this, relics with this. You can counter all sorts of stuff. And if you have stackers on board, it can be even bigger things too. So maybe this will be good, maybe it will be terrible. But with the extra selection from Brainstorm, you can normally get them in your hand and get to a point where you want to cast it. You know, this list is not set in stone, but I think it's a good baseline, and I kind of want to get the hive mind on it because I feel like there's something here. It can definitely do very silly things. If your opponent doesn't interact with you, you just win. Like, if they can't interact with you and they're slower than you, you will just win. If they're an aggressive deck and you mill an all to the bone, you probably just win as well.
Yeah.
It has a lot of just I win factor that your opponent can't do anything about. And the brainstorm helps you in the games where your opponent actually is interacting with you and you need to be able to find ways to fight through stuff. That's why I kind of like it a little bit. The sideboard is a little strange, but it's sort of like a typical dredge sideboard. Do you want to run us through the sideboard, Luke?
Yeah, so the important thing with dredge sideboards, and you'll notice that this is the same with ours, is every single card in the sideboard has flashback. So you can cast it after you've milled it. Rotten Reunion is is our graveyard hate that we're packing to stop other graveyard decks doing what they want to do. The important thing here is it also creates a zombie creature token, which can be used to do the flashback of Dread Return. It's just a guy that sticks around for value. So that's why we're going to play that It has flashback, so we can cast it off with Miller. Ancient Grudge is our artifact removal of choice. You pretty much are forced to bring these in because all of the common graveyard hate that people are going to run, like Relic of Progenitus or Nihil Spellbomb, are artifacts. So you've got to run Ancient Grudges, and you've pretty much got to board these in every matchup, unless you're absolutely certain your opponent isn't running any of the graveyard hate artifacts. Flaring Pain is because Lotleth Giant specifically deals damage, so cards like Prismatic Strands can stop it, and Flaring Pain unstops it. I guess it means that they can't blank your combo turn with a Prismatic Strands. And then the next one we've got Moments Pieces and Gnaw to the Bones. More Gnaw to the Bones. These are our anti-aggro cards. It's life gain and stopping their big attack. And then finally, we've got more copies of Deep Analysis for really grindy control matchups, because this card is really, really good versus control, because they'd have to counter both sides of it. It's just like, if you cast both sides, you're just going up like 4 cards.
There's definitely an argument to be made that maybe these Gnaw to the Bones and Deep Analysis could be Spellstutter sprites as well and swap them around, because maybe you don't need these as much game 1. You could also have like Exhumes in this slot. I feel like this is a very flexible slot, but I think this deck has legs. I think it can, depending on the meta game, it can definitely shine and steal some victories for free.
Yeah, it's also just really fun, and it's also really, I think this is the same with Lizard Twin as well. The decks that we've been showing are decks that we think are really fun and rewarding to learn the lines and navigate, because I think that's kind of what compels us as players, really, is it's like we like to figure out how to take optimal lines and learn decks that are quite difficult.
Yeah, it's fun to learn. And they're sort of the 3 new style decks that I'm excited to see tried out with the MH3 cards. As you'll note, a lot of snackers, but got quite a fair few new cards in the Lizard Twin list here. So we'll see if any of these decks end up putting up numbers. Do you want to say anything else, Luke? Got any closing notes? Or
the Lizard Twin list is running 20 new cards, so 1/3 of the deck is full new cards, which is really exciting to me.
Yeah, I'm excited to try it out. If you are playing in paper, there is a card that does not exist on Magic Online that could be very good for Lizard Twin. It is called Rust. It costs 1 green, it is an instant, and it counters the activated ability of an artifact, which is something that Cyclostorm has used to try and beat Grave Hate before. Now, if you play this deck in paper, you might want Rust as a way to deal with Grave Hate, because if you're trying to combo, not for definite, but it is a card you can consider that isn't online, and that's probably why it's not made the sideboard. But just something to consider.
What the fuck? How are you gonna drop the bombshell that card Rust exists on me now? What?
Yeah, have you not seen Rust before, Luke?
No! Why have we not been using this?
I forgot it existed until like a second ago.